Здравствуйте. And that's it.
That's it? So we'll speak English. Okay.
English would be better. It'll be very short.
Okay, Dad. As well as you know, President and CEO of Ford Solars, I guess you are, in this or that way, also responsible for some parts of Ford activity here in Russia. So the first question is regarding this probably dramatic U-turn in strategy of Ford. All of us remember that Ford was a pioneer of CKD here in Russia. And even more, Ford, in fact, showed to other industry that you can do it yourself, because Ford was first who had 100% owned by Ford factory and covered all activity. Now, you have a joint venture, 50-50 joint venture with Solars, and it means, well, what does it mean? And what were the main reasons for it?
What does it mean? Sometimes I ask the question. Well, first of all, you know, Henry Ford had a belief that you build where you're going to sell, and that philosophy has always impacted Ford. And that's why we came back to Russia to invest in Russia. There was a huge future in the country. But the challenge is as St. Petersburg grew, and the plant grew, and the plant grew, and the plant grew, and then it ran out of space. It's a very space-constricted plant. They've done amazing things, working spaces above and below, but there's just no more space. And I think if you're not in the auto industry, you may sometimes underestimate the time it takes to construct all new facilities, go through the legislative process, checking the ground, hiring the people, putting in the facilities. It's a lot easier if you want to move fast in the marketplace to take existing facilities, and in this case, in great condition, to take an existing workforce and retrain them in a different set of vehicles. And that allows us to do much. We wanted to operate a lot faster. We just couldn't do any more with the great team that we have in St. Petersburg.
Okay. If we'll take a balance, and on the one cup we'll have, let's say, material or physical resources of Solars, on the other we'll put, let's say, administrative resource of the Solars. Where is the balance for you? What was more important to taking this decision to make a joint venture with Solars?
I think certainly the speed to market on the facilities was the #1 reason. Obviously, the Solars team, and working with them closely now, they have tremendous knowledge of the market, which helps a lot. But the real reason for both sides was to move fast. Only having focus in Mondeo in the market, where new segments were growing in SUVs and other areas, and having limited capacity, we knew we could bring the global Ford brands that had gone in our one Ford portfolio. We could bring more cars to Russia quicker that would hit the key customer segments, and we just didn't have any other way to move at that speed.
Okay, you mentioned segments, and as far as I'm informed, as far as I know, the part of your strategy or part of your politics now is to keep on the market only models which are basically produced here, SKD or CKD. So now, in fact, again, as far as I'm informed, we are losing Fiesta, Ford C-Max gone, Galaxy gone, we will not see new Ford B-Max, and so on. What are the reasons? Also, I mean that probably Ford of Europe, which we know now is not in the best condition, also lose part of the market in Russia. Are all those models which were not produced here in Russia were absolutely non-profitable? What are reasons for this
more
approach?
A question of less profits versus non-profits, and more a question of focus. The MAV segment is not a really big segment in Russia. It's very small, like in the United States. And we needed to spend more time where the segments were bigger and growing, and those are in SUVs. Yes, we could work with the dealerships to try to sell a few cars. We were making money, but it isn't going to solve Europe's challenges. I mean, Europe's going through a very difficult times for the employees and their families and everybody in Europe. And I think we have a good turnaround plan modeled on what the United States did, and I'm quite confident that we'll come out much stronger.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any further plan to, in this or that way, to unite dealership network of owned or your previous dealership of Ford and Solar's dealership?
I
In
think
which areas?
that was one of the initial ideas that the two companies we could take our two networks and we would combine them and there would be some super advantage. But what we found is, compared to the other manufacturers that we compare ourselves with, we generally have the same structure. We already have dealerships in the key cities that we want. Some of those dealers that were selling Fords were already Solar's own dealerships. And for the most part, 98% of the cases, we had the coverage we needed. Adding more dealers to make the dealers less profitable wasn't good for either side, so there was no reason.
And as far as I know, in let's say in more or less Solar structures, they have new joint venture, Alarm Solars, basically dedicated to distributing.
They do. And we've seen that precedent before. Our partners in Turkey, who we also have a joint venture, much of which this one was modeled after, they have a dealership networks where they own retail franchises across Turkey very successfully, and we found that also works well.
Now you are almost ready for CKD of Ford Explorer, relatively big SUV. And as far as I know, the terms, it was very rapid process from the decision to CKD process. Did you use some new approaches? Because it's not an easy way to arrange with suppliers everywhere in the world, also taking into account localization here in Russia. Probably it was some sort of record.
The rumors are true. It was a lot of work, but it was mainly blood, sweat, and tears, I would say. That is the process. It was a car that we were importing in small volume to Russia, but not in the complete set that we wanted to. It wasn't exactly what we wanted, and we could see a huge opportunity. For many of the reasons that SUVs have done well in the U.S., the comparable petrol prices and other reasons, it was a natural fit for the market. And when they redesigned the Explorer about 2 years ago and it had a huge leap in the United States, we could see a much bigger potential here. So we started lining up some actions.
It seems to me probably in a month you'll start CKD.
Right about then.
Okay.
Or so.
Well, you are working now here in Russia, signing Agreement 166, yes, so now your manufacturer who promised at least to produce 350,000 plus cars a year. And it also means that you have some duties regarding establishing some centers of competence here in Russia. And what are your basic feeling? Is it some sort of we must, or we really want it, we really need it? And if so, what will be first steps? In what area these centers of competence will be focused? Just to support manufacturing process, or also develop products, or probably sooner or later we'll see something like small local R&D or test centers? What are your ideas about it?
Well, we all signed up to our individual agreements with the government, and it's certainly an evolving question. In the early days, for sure, it's going to be supporting the manufacturing launches and the localization in Russia. There's plenty enough work to do on that, on making the supply base take it to the whole new level at the speed that we want to grow in the country, because localizing is not for the government, it's just good business. The parts are a long way from America to here, or from Europe to here, and it's cheaper to do many of them in Russia and avoid the costs. So that's the primary reason that we need to move fast, and that requires a lot of engineering support to make it and to do it with quality like we've always shown we can do in St. Petersburg.
And what are, for you, as you see it, main problem in area of HR? I mean, first of all, why Solars, and mainly focused on engineering. You work actively, let's say, in 3 areas. In the north, meaning St. Petersburg and factory, in Moscow, of course, and now in Tatarstan. Do you feel some differences and probably some different problems of HR in this region? Probably it also depending upon what will be activity of
That's a
these
good question.
centers.
So you're correct. We have our staff offices mainly in Moscow, the facilities in Tatarstan and St. Petersburg. In Tatarstan, again, we took advantage of the existing SARS workforce, which is a great team, and just basically training them in Ford processes. And then we had to add more people there. In St. Petersburg, because of the speed that we want to move, we've taken a lot of people out of St. Petersburg to help train Ford processes into the Tatarstan operations. It's not like they needed training in manufacturing or efficiency or visual factory or anything. They just need trainings in how the way Ford does things. So that takes some adjustments. And then really it's just putting a new company together. We have a lot of people to hire in every kind of operation: finance, purchasing, product engineering, manufacturing, and it's a huge amount of hiring, recruiting new people, and particularly in where we're growing the new facilities.
Yes, and talking about focusing of these new centers of competence, do you feel that they will approach to R&D, that probably sooner or later we can compare this or that way to R&D, well, in Munich or test center in Belgium, I mean, Lommel, Ford has. Do you think it will grow local centers of competence, I mean?
That's a hard one to predict over time, and that depends on global costs, et cetera. But generally, the manufacturers have core engineering centers so they can control their global products and engineer them for the world. It's inefficient to be doing the engineering more than one time in more than one location. So generally, the engineering of whatever it is, either components or vehicles, is centralized. And I would say it'll continue to be a combination of what's best to optimize centrally and what's best to optimize in Russia to get the best results for cost and efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Few manufacturers working here, and especially inside this agreement of 166, already announced that they plan to establish engine assembling plants here, and as far as I am informed, you also plan to do it. Can you give us some details of some ideas about your future engine manufacturing facility?
Well, certainly we signed with the government that we would do a powertrain action,
Yeah.
and I would say that plan is in progress, but nothing to say at this time.
Russian market, yeah, it's really differs from European line. It's
That's
a
true.
car basically focused on America. Then you'll have, let's say, more or less, as far as I know, Indian, a small SUV, probably EcoSport. Then again, as far as I am informed, probably small sedan or hatchback based on Fiesta, etc. So, and two cars, I mean EcoSport and probably small Fiesta-based car, will not be on sale in the European market, not talking about American market. Can you describe in some words what are specifically some specific features for Russian market in terms of model range and in terms of segmentation?
As we mentioned earlier before, I mean, we've been delighted with Focus for all these years, still being number one in its segment of the foreign brands and number one in the world. But that combination of cars only is not enough in Russia anymore. And with SUVs being 26, 27, 28% of the market, we needed to go there. So we already announced Explorer being manufactured in the country. We announced that in the second half of the year we'll have the Kuga, the new Kuga, being complete CKD here in the country. And that's important because both of those products, obviously the Explorer not sold in Europe, and the new Kuga is now the same as the Escape in the United States. And that change in the product may not be perfect for some of the European markets where it was probably a little bit more refined before, but I think the changes that were made for the Kuga, for the global Kuga now, is nearly perfect for the Russian market. And so far what we've seen with the sales just over the last few weeks since it's been out, it's been far exceeded our expectations. And so both vehicles have versus last year. So I think that's what you'll continue to see is a slow adjustments to some of the plans. So some of the other parts of the plan that were in discussion at points of time maybe 2 years ago, we've made a lot of changes to those plans and are trying to optimize to what the trends are in the Russian market.
Can you clarify situation with Mondeo? There were some rumors that probably you'll begin CKD of American version of Mondeo. Can you give us some ideas about future of Mondeo here in Russia?
I can say that we'll continue the current Mondeo, building that at least through 2015. That's the plan, and we have a product that sells well. Regrettably, not with the full supply that we needed over the last 3 or 4 months, but that's getting better. But the Mondeo continues to be a successful car for us, and I don't see any adjustments in the near term.
So you'll, in the future, based on European version of new Mondeo, or still
no
not
comment, not sure.
Okay. Okay. You know, now we have 5 big manufacturers working here in Russia with Agreement 166. Yes? Basic condition is, as we mentioned, 300 or 350,000 a year and so on. And if we look forward, probably 4, 5, 7 years, it means that we can face with the risk of overcapacity, at least in this or that segment. And what I'm afraid, for example, now it's absolutely clear that if you have very affordable SUV, for example, as Renault Duster, they can kill, or more or less kill, make them nearly died, some other segments, small B sedan or hatchbacks. And now almost all manufacturers, especially with the big facilities, will move to small SUV segment. Then probably it will be main issue for economy, let's say. They will move back. So is there some risk of, as I mentioned, overcapacity, or at least in some segment? Do you take into account these risks? Because sooner or later we'll have huge amount of production facilities.
Well, all manufacturers are looking ahead to try to estimate the capacity, but everybody wants to be in a growing market. So while you will probably sleep fine at night, I will be worried. And the customers will be happy because there'll be lots of competition, suppressing prices. They will be delighted. So for the Russian consumer, it couldn't get any better. For us, we'll wait and see, but someone will do okay and someone will do less well. And I think we have the right plan.
So no risk of overcapacity. By the way, I didn't sleep
the
well
risk
too.
is there. We'll hope the government takes care of the industry.
Okay. And probably one of the main question here regarding your own forecast for this year, probably for Ford, first of all, then for market and all, and if you'll give us some ideas of your vision of changing in segmentation of market, and probably some idea for, let's say, 3 or 5 years ahead, please.
Well, I think obviously the automotive industry has always been a public partner, private partner relationship, and if you want an industry as a government, you need to fight for it, and certainly the Russian government is trying to do that to have a competitive Russian automotive industry. And it's fighting against other investment locations in the world of where people want to put resources. Right now, certainly the growth is not as fast as it was, retail sales, automotive sales, and it's not a concern. We're all delighted to be at 3 million and not 2 million or something like going through Europe. But growth draws attention, and that's a good thing in the auto business, and I think that's what we need to have. And I think there's key parts: a strong industry, a competitive cost base in all its elements, from the supply base, the labor side, et cetera, because we all, as in local manufacturers, we compete against the global automotive base. And if we want to build and sell cars in Russia and build cars in Russia, we have to have competitive costs. And we have to have a predictable legal and regulatory environment. If the regulations start moving around on safety and emissions or what price and taxes, et cetera, years of product planning can go down the waste and investment goes the wrong way. So a predictable business environment is always a big help.
Okay, as well as now is more or less predictable in frames of this situation. What is your forecast for this year? It will be slowly growing, flat, or?
I would say flattish. It looks pretty flattish
Flat.
today. You've got new news for me? The rates drop, something else happens? Perhaps it won't be flat.
Okay, Ted, thank you very much. I'm sure now we'll have some questions, probably to detail some ideas from Ted. Are there any questions?
Oh, a daring man in the middle.
Okay.
Hello, Ted. My name is Platon from AGC. We are supplying the glass, yeah, to your company. I know that Ford is a great company, sure. But today, if we put off the ground, and for me, a little bit curiosity from the leader of such a great company, how do you see the car after 2050, the end of this century?
I'm a little man. That's a pretty big question. Well, it flies and drives itself. I'm not sure, but I like the Bill Gates quote. Everybody overestimates what can be achieved in 2 years and completely underestimates what can be achieved in 10 years. And my vision is about 5 right now. I'm not thinking 10 years out, and I'm not really on the design side. I can see 5, 10 years out for the business here of what we need to do, and it's really about, if Russia wants to be serious about production in Russia, getting affordable local cost materials, tier 2, tier 3 raw materials, competitive is critical. Otherwise, the cost base is not there. Can it be done? It certainly was done in Eastern Europe for some of the supply there, and we can get it. We can get to the right place to be very, very affordable, I think. But I don't have a vision beyond that. There was another question there in the middle.
Yeah, in the middle.
Mr. Cannis, Bill King from Ernst & Young. I understand that for the 166 people who've signed up, localization is a top-of-mind issue. What do you see are the primary challenges to being able to achieve your localization targets?
Well, the localization is a top issue. I think the issue is not whether it was needed to be done or not needed to be done. The government requirements make the pace very fast. So mainly it's getting all the people to do so much work at the same time. All of us are using many suppliers or some of the drawing on some of the same talent in the industry all at the same time. And that requires a tremendous amount of coordination from the home parts of the engineering parts to getting that information passed over to the industry locally. That passover happens very fast. In some cases, like us in Tatarstan, where we don't have our complete supply base that we'd like close by, like some of the great work you've seen in Kaluga. So that requires either brownfield or greenfield actions that can take a bit of time to keep moving. So mostly it's a pace issue. It's not a problem of supply yet. In future years, I think as the cost tier 2 and raw materials get more localized, it'll get better. At this point, it's just pace to meet the timing and plans that have been committed to the government, and also take advantage of the huge growth in the industry for some of these places where we as a competitor, not the industry in total, but we as a competitor are not in, and we would like to be there faster.
Maria Vola, Consulting for Drive. Just a brief question concerning localization. Everybody talks about what needs to be done altogether, and how important it is, as you just said, to create the cost base and viable suppliers of raw materials in tier 2 and 3. However, where do you see the major action need? On whose part? Is this the government policy? Is this supplier side? Or are these the OEMs that can do the major pull in that direction, or that need to do the major pull in that direction?
Personally, I don't see myself that it's government policy that's going to change much. I think government can always make it easier, and not easier in an unfortunate way. I mean easier in a good way. I think government can make it easier, but most of the work is the suppliers and the supply base. They've got to want to come to Russia, invest in Russia, and it takes work to localize. It actually takes resources and people and effort and investment finding and trying out parts. It takes a quality risk. It's a lot easier to bring in your quality component from somewhere else in the world with no risk. It's low work, no engineering required, and you know what, nothing will fail. It's mainly effort, I believe, at this point.
Would that be the effort mostly on the supplier side, or do you see that OEMs have to invest much more than, for example, in Western Europe when they are trying to attract suppliers? Do you see there the much bigger need for cooperation?
It's always a partnership with our suppliers.
Yeah.
Nobody does anything on their own. They work with our engineering and manufacturing teams, quality teams, to come up with joint solutions, and they need to do the investment. Now, what would have been possible to localize in Russia 10 years ago when Ford started? Well, it wouldn't have been possible. But the industry and the scale of some of the segments has created opportunities where previously there weren't any opportunities. And if you ask some of the changes in 5 years, there will be components that nobody would have thought of scaling in Russia before if the industry continues to grow. There are certain thresholds that have to happen in the industry.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
We had gentleman in the middle. Yeah.
Yuri Friedman, Bolton. You mentioned that you believe in flat market development. So my question is, when do you think you will reach a volume target, 300,000 cars per year?
We committed to the government a strict timeline. I believe our timing is 2015 off the top of my head, and that we would put our capacity in place. Anybody can put capacity in, as that's been seen in other industries and other countries, to your earlier question. The more challenging part is always selling that capacity. Do you have exactly the right products that the customer wants at the right quality? So we have a plan that lays out our strategy to make sure that we can offer exactly the right products that we think our customers want here in Russia, that completes the portfolio out of the global Ford products that we have available, and at the timing that we can provide a quality product, which means bringing our suppliers along, hiring the labor, teaching them how to operate in a Ford system. So that step-by-step plan to make sure that you have those combinations is part of this great challenge of the next couple of years.
Rasul Khapayev, Michelin Company. I have a question for Cannis about this year. Russian market will be unusual for Russia for last year because it's first year of stable automotive industry in Russia. So this is challenging, I would say, conditions for all the OEMs localized in Russia and present in Russia. So what is the four key success factors that you can tell that will allow to Ford to win, if not win, to what is your strategy for the future, what you want to be in 5 years, and what will be the key success factors for you to achieve your targets?
All right, thanks very much. I think, well, first of all, I think it's all a great thing that we're here 2 years later and didn't slide down with the rest of Europe, which in theory, with some sort of panic, I think there was even some concern off and on last year, and that didn't happen. So it is nice to be at somewhat stable. The challenges of growing and the challenges of staying flat and the challenges of optimizing your business in a sinking industry are all different kinds of actions. But the operating metrics of the business are pretty much the same. And it's just making sure to make the decisions at the proper time, whether you're going up, staying flat, or going down. And those are different decisions. And in those processes, in some areas we're growing, some areas we're kind of flat, like the cars. And we are making our decisions individually across each of those, and we make them every single day, looking back over the previous month and what we need to do to adjust to what's happening in the marketplace. As new vehicles come in, as competition comes in, as the industry changes, we have to make immediate adjustments. We review it every week, and those are the adjustments we make to optimize the business.
My name is Kai Wollenhaupt from Lindemark Corporation. My question is twofold. One side, I think there's a big hype about the Russian automotive market, and I think driven by the Decree 166, so a lot of localization for us as Lindemark, I think a big opportunity. Nevertheless, I think we are talking about a limited amount of Russians as potential buyers. We are talking about 3 million cars. Compared, I think, to emerging countries like China or India, I think, where do you see the potential I think, where the volumes has to be maxed out? And on the other side, could you imagine that from satisfying the local needs, could Russia become also a country for export? Thank you.
Okay, I think, yeah, well, good questions. Myself and my competitors, we all look at the same data on car densities and et cetera, and any way you look at it, Russia should have a bright future. It's a country with enormous resources that the rest of the world needs, and which resource is most needed, I don't know later, but it has most of them. And those resources are available, and it has an educated population that is willing and growing. And most of us project that next few years that the Russian industry would pass Germany, and I think that that's very likely. And it's already one of the largest automotive markets in the world. So I think that's why we're all here, is because there is the opportunity, if you look at any of the numbers against other neighboring markets, of population and capability to grow. I think the whether you can export is dependent a lot more on cost. That is the number one game in the auto industry. And some countries will have issues with their unions and their footprint that could impact it. But things like the customs union, where you have a definite benefit, but somebody outside the customs union over time should help. But cost is the most important thing. If your costs aren't competitive, you're not going to ship to anybody when they can buy something else cheaper, and especially from the same source. So I think this goes hand in hand with the localization question earlier, is if we can't get the cost structure closer and all the raw materials and some of the supply local based in Russia, then those export opportunities will be limited. But as the industry grows and the scale grows and as the localization grows, the cost base should improve, and it should offer more opportunities for the industry as a whole. Who will have first? That may depend on their international footprint. If one of our competitors doesn't have facilities in one set of countries and it's better to get them from Russia, then they'll ship there because it's just good business.
You mentioned custom union, and I already mentioned when a lady from Duma had her presentation regarding scrappage fee. Now, do you think it's some sort of dangerous situation when we have a scrappage fee here in Russia, but in the custom union in Belarus or Kazakhstan, we have not? So it can cause some sort of price war, no?
Consistent is definitely better.
So probably you and your colleagues make some effort to make the situation more reasonable. Okay, some more questions?
Şükrü Tetik from OIB, Turkish Automotive Industries Exporters Union. Mr. Cannis, what is your feeling after your successful years in Turkey when you compare the supply base, Turkey and Russia, basing on the localization activities we are facing now in Russia?
I think they're at a different point in time. I think Russia looks a bit like Turkey was before they were formed part of the European Customs Union 10 years ago or 13 years ago. It's very similar to the change. The scale in Russia is bringing the opportunity to localize that wasn't there before. When you look at Turkey pre the European Union integration, there was a lot of local Turkish industry, but not enough to get large scale. Now that the Turkish industry can produce parts across the network for scalable products being sold by Ford or Renault into the rest of the Union, it allows just a lot more competitive opportunities than you would have had otherwise. And that's where this industry, this is where the combination of public and private helps. Customs unions, scale for the industry, eliminating unnecessary taxes and costs in a system that reduce purchase, all of those will help.
Question in the middle.
Sergey Vinogradov, Engineering Center Car. When do you mean localization?
Do you mean production as it is, or you accept some adaptation of capacity of future producer, maybe some redesign, change material? Is it acceptable for you?
It depends, I would say. It depends on the benefit. So any redesign of a part, Ford has one of the great, I always like the Alan Mulally quote when he joined Ford as CEO. And they said, oh, you know, all these other guys are buying brands and doing this. And he says, oh, no, I don't need to. I've got 4 different Fords, and I just need to become one. And we had Ford on North America building and engineering their own cars, and the Europeans and the Australian team, and South America. And we won't deviate from the one Ford strategy on the cars. They'll be global cars, adapted to address every market condition, but global cars. If there's a great opportunity, we will engineer away from that. If there's a great opportunity for specifications on materials or local fabric or whatever absolutely. Will we use local steels? Absolutely. There's plenty of opportunities to do that, working with that private partnership between the supply base, the local availability of materials, and the company. It's mostly easier just to take the same part and no redesign. But if the profit opportunity is big enough, we definitely and have made the changes.
Probably last question before coffee break. Do we have? Okay. Now we'll have probably 15 to 20 minutes coffee break, and I would like to thank you, Cannis, President and CEO of Ford Solars.
Thanks very much. Enjoy coffee.